In today's world, you must always be security conscious. But what does that term usually mean? As a technologist, I feel it can apply to many different things. Hello, my name is Jamil Spain, developer advocate with the IBM Cloud. But when it comes to security, I want to specifically focus on the topic of database security. And to do this, I want to go through a few points which should illustrate some thoughts to keep top of mind as you start to plan during development. And definitely, I hope you take these notice of these topics, especially at the end of your project before it's time to go live here. So the first topic that I want to talk about is definitely where you're planning your database to be on-prem or in another cloud, another remote location. You should first think about the user access to the system. As you know, you can walk up to any computer, try to log in, and actually start typing things. So if you're at home or in an office, make sure you have it under a locked door. Definitely. And if you're considering a cloud provider, they definitely must list out their cloud procedures, security protocols they have in place, who has access to server rooms, and all these kind of things. Pay special attention as well, whether you're on a shared environment versus a dedicated kind of server. So very important things to keep in mind here. Now, secondly, if you're running a particular application, let's say you're doing a LAMP stack, which is common, and most stacks like that are common, whether you're dealing with LAMP or the actual MySQL Express MongoDB kind of situation, it's very useful or convenient to put all of these components on one server. But what does that really expose you to? Let's say you're doing a LAMP stack, Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, and there happens to be a compromise. We know from there that there are two things that can be compromised. You have the operating system and maybe something in the PHP code, particularly a vulnerability that could happen here. So in the event that something does get compromised, another best practice to take into consideration is to have separation. And I'll just say of server here. Do some shorthand code here. So maybe you want to run that on a separate machine. Diff. Okay. So it'll be separated. So if in the event that something does happen, maybe at a Linux OS level, you have the ability that data is set apart on another machine that you can really isolate what happens there as well. This is especially important if you have an e-commerce business occurring for you. Now, if you are subscribing to a SaaS service that runs your e-commerce application, do a little checkout, ask some questions about do they have some of these practices in place. Next, let's deal with the actual access to the system. We talked about physical access. Let's talk about user. Now, I believe if I can quote a recent Verizon survey, it said that almost 80% of compromises are from password selection. So make sure you get complex passwords. Avoid the usual standard passwords that are there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Really figure out some complexity of characters, numbers, and special characters, and maybe increase the limit out to at least be up to more than 10 characters. Really just figure out your complexity there, what your policy should be in that use case. And then also, if you do have sensitive information like we were just discussing, figure out what the context of the application is. If it is an e-commerce application, we do realize that at some point you're going to have sensitive data. And in those scenarios, you want to make sure you probably consider having some encryption at rest. If data must sit, if you must hold credit card information, make sure you actually plan out for how you do your encryption and decryption. This is actually another way that most will actually leverage a third-party provider where you don't really have to store any sensitive information. It can list on a third party's service, which usually is already set up to be compliant for security, have those in place So if you're not up to particular situation of planning for those contingencies, please consider using an outside service, which is already set up to use those. And most of those services will have proper ways that you can pull data in and out on demand as you need, normally through REST APIs here. Okay, let's move over to my next four that we'll use. And so we talked about physical access, which users have access, keeping separation of those servers, those complex passwords, and making sure we have encryption there just in case data must sit at rest. Let's talk about the next thing is most database servers, they have published default ports. So you want to make sure that these are things that most of these databases can be run locally. I can stage them up pretty easily. I know like MySQL is 3306. You have Mongo 27017. These are all common published ports. So anyone can research these. Now in the actual cybersecurity world on most OSs, especially Linux, there is a popular utility you can use to run scans on different VMs over the internet, especially if you have a public IP address. So if I do a scan and it comes up that 3306 is active, that immediately lets me know you're running MySQL database server on that actual server. So you want to kind of really obfuscate these particular details from being so easily used. And if we want to take that concept way beyond databases, we can also use that for just normal SSH access. The standard port for that is 22. We can probably run that on something like 2222, something that's non-standard. So any of those services that you want to go live with, just do your research and understand, have a strategy in place on ways that you can use that. And if you're using that across multiple servers, let's say you're managing a farm of these, maybe it'll be a standard port that you choose to run across those, so everyone always knows the pattern that you're going to use. Now, of course, for any of these situations, whether you want to change the port, most servers, if it's an OS that you're doing, or we'll just talk about OSs now, so you're doing a Linux OS, they're going to have particular firewalls that are available here. And with that, you want to probably, if the goal is that you have those separate servers and there's only one machine that will be available to communicate with that server, go ahead and put that server in as a allowed IP address, okay? Rather than standard, by default, most services may come up and say access from anywhere. But if you only know the path that must come in, go ahead and set that up so that happens. Now, with a lot of SaaS services, you can also do the same thing. I know if I subscribe to a service like on IBM Cloud, if I know that my remote server is only coming from one IP address, that should be what you do. Only allow those to come in, all right? And maybe if you're working from your own headquarters or place that you do development, add in those IPs as well to come. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Hey, Jamil, it is kind of easy to change your IP address, but for those individuals, you really must know what you're doing to try to imitate other IP addresses from what you it's not an easy kind of hack to kind of do. So, but for those, these additional methods can really go in place to really compound the effect that you can have here. Next, when you're running your database, you want to make sure you figure out how you're going to do backups. Especially when I started out with LAMP stacks, it's easy to get this whole configuration set up. You can spin up a VM at home or in the cloud within minutes, maybe less than an hour, and I can quickly go yum or apt-get and install the necessary packages to get Apache, MySQL, and your database and your programming language installed. You can be off to the races, live, build your site, code it up, be live. But we want to make sure that we actually are able to go through the process of backing up and restoring, all right? You want to be able to put this on a regular schedule when you will perform this activity. And most importantly, in the situation that you have separate servers, and there is an event of a compromise there, you also want to make sure you have a copy of your data, all right, that is set up, is secure, and wherever you're putting that to, the backups, the backup files at that, make sure that's in a place that is encrypted, all right? So you may, definitely you want to, if you can, do that extra step of complexity. It's not enough that I have a separate database server that I do backups on regularly, let's say every morning at midnight, or I mean, not midnight, but let's say 5 a.m., 7 a.m., whatever the actual cadence that you want to run that cron job. But do I really want to keep those on the same server? All right, because if someone is able to compromise that server, they can easily unzip, back that up, or maybe change data and then restore that themselves. All right, so definitely make sure you're keeping those backups somewhere that you know is safe and secure, and if possible, if necessary, take extra steps to make sure that those backups can be encrypted in some way, especially if they maintain any sensitive information. And lastly, I want to say is that we want to make sure we're keeping apps up to date. Now, this is not just for the different database versions. We know that different vendors will allow, like, well, if you take MySQL, for instance, if I can pick on that for a second, you'll see different versions come out. Make sure you're in depth. You get the announcements for what's changed in different versions as they come out. Make sure that is applicable for you. So you want to make sure you have a strategy for how you will upgrade. And that's usually involved. There's really not a concern there if you already plan for your backups. Being able to stage a way that you can upgrade your database server should be as easy as backing up and restoring to a new version with just off the general principle of that. Now, naturally, some versions may have changes in underlying infrastructure or the way they're constructed from different versions, so you have to account for that. But usually that information will be actually documented for you to use. But I want to point out one more thing here on our last note here. It's not just the actual application, MySQL database or the database versions, it's also any code that you write. You want to make sure that those are up to date. So let's take, for instance, I know, I know it's probably you'll see on the internet that, let's take WordPress, for instance. There are thousands of plugins that are out there. I think a recent survey found that at least more than half of those haven't been updated in years, all right? So if I may have my database up to date, secure, with encryption, backed up, have all my walls covered, but let's say I have vulnerabilities in the application that I'm running. Well, if someone can gain access to that application, naturally that will have connections to the database, and so it just opens up another door that you don't want to have. So on top of that, what I'm trying to summarize here is that beyond having the actual database at a certain version, make sure that all the code you write that's accessing that, whether it's a prepackaged application or something that you're programming yourself, has all the necessary updates available just to ensure that code that is accessing the database, there's no impersonation that can happen there from someone gaining access to that server, exposing vulnerabilities in the code to actually get to that particular database. So, in summary, these are just some tips to consider when you must kind of look at how secure you are with your access to your databases. Again, this is a principle that I like to think as I'm solutioning for a project at the start, definitely in the middle, and definitely before you go live in production. So on your next project, please take these tips into consideration. Thank you for your time.
If you have questions, please drop us a line below. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, please like and subscribe.